Hi, my name is Susan Rainey and I am an avid knitter, and I also teach at the Yarnery in St. Paul. And recently I taught a class on how to knit striped projects like shawls and scarves and not have any ends to weave in. Well, actually there is one end, and it is the bind off. When you get to the bind off, there is that one end to do. But other than that, all throughout the project you can have all the ends woven in as you go, so that it keeps the edges neater and you don't have to go back and weave in ends at the end. So this sample shows what it looks like to stop and start adding colors and not have any ends. I have had people say, well, you can only do that with wool, you can only felt splice with wool, and I am splicing, but I'm not technically felt splicing. I just call it splicing, and I've done it with every kind of yarn. And here's an example, a little small sample that I made that uses all the techniques that I'm going to show you in this YouTube video. So here are some examples of just some yarn that I've already kind of feathered out. What I do is I pull off the plies in kind of a staggered length so that they are not all the same length, and that feathers out the end, and that's how I do the splicing. These are the topics that we are going to be covering in the YouTube video, and they're also kind of a good reference for you. The first thing we'll talk about is how to splice in that cast-on tail so that you don't have an end to weave in from the beginning of your project. We will add a new color without adding an end to weave in, and we will also show how to end color A and continue with color B. So if you've added a stripe and then you're ending it, but the working yarn continues. And I had not seen anything about how to do this, so I think I invented it. I don't know, we'll see. But I'll show you how to end one color, but you continue with the other color. And then I'll also show you how to do a typical Russian join. Okay, let's say I have just done a long tail cast on, and I want to get rid of this initial end so that there is no end at the beginning, which I think would make a great soap opera title. But anyway, so what I would do is feather out that end like I've already discussed, and I do that by pulling the plies and just breaking them at intervals so that they're not all broken in the same location. So I make some longer and some shorter. What I do is I just wrap it in the direction of the twist of the yarn. I wet it because I want it to stick to itself. Now people say, oh, you can't do this with anything but wool, it won't stick to itself. Well, I'm not really trying to felt it, I'm just trying to get it to mimic the yarn. And then I start knitting. I'm going to move my water. So I just start knitting, and as I knit I twist that yarn because I want to keep it with that same twist. Tighten that up, and as I knit I will just make sure that stays twisted. And I just keep going until I get all the way to the other side. In this situation, we are going to be adding a second color to our knitting. And so to do that, I will start with the next color. And what I do is I feather out that end just like we've done before. And so I will take those plies and I feather them out. So then what I do is I make a loop, and I just splice this back on itself. So I just twist it around the yarn. That's too long. And wet it so I can get it to stick to itself like we've already talked about. Okay, now what I have found is that if I am doing garter stitch, I'm going to want to do one extra step, because if you don't, you're going to get a blip of the second color showing through on the right side. So what I do to get rid of that blip is I just knit one stitch with the old color and then put it right back on the needle. And I act like that isn't there. Just ignore that and keep going, and then that gets rid of that blip. Okay, so to get started, I have started my loop. I put the needle in and I just hook that loop on my needle like it's the next stitch. pull that up to tighten it. And now as I go, I twist these stitches. If I need a little more moisture, put that in, and I tighten up that stitch pretty well. And then I just start knitting. So if you think, wow, gets really thick down here. That's thicker than if I had not done it that way, if I had not wrapped that tail back. And yes, that's true, but when you think about it, it's still thinner and looks better than if I had gone back and woven in that end. So it's still an improvement to that. Okay, in this situation, we are going to want to stop our green color, but we want to continue our white color. So typically, as we've done before, we have spliced that end to the yarn, like when we spliced our tail, but we can't really do that this time because of the barber pole effect that we would have, and you would see this green and white and it just wouldn't look right. So what we want to do is truly end the green and not have an end to weave in. So the way that I came up with to do this is to do essentially a half Russian join, and we will be splicing the tail back on itself, and that's how we will get rid of it. So the first thing we need to know is where exactly to end our green yarn, and I came up with a way to estimate that length. What I do is I bring the yarn tail just up and over the needle and I pin it. Now typically in a Russian join you would just end the yarn right at the base of the stitch, but I need a little bit more length, not even quite a half an inch here, and so I need to mark it somehow, and so I came up with that way with that knitting needle idea. Now I'm going to need to pull those stitches back, so I will just take about like 6-8 stitches. Just so I have enough room to splice that tail back on itself. So I'll pull that off, turn it. I want to be in a position to continue knitting. And what I'm going to do is fold my yarn at that point. That's the part or the point where I want that green to end. And I'm going to add a little piece of waste yarn. And the reason I do this is as I knit back, that end is going to get shorter and shorter, and that just gives me something to hang on to. So I'll do that, and I'm going to put it right at the point where my pin is located. I am then going to splice my end the way we've been doing it, right on that mark, and do some wetting here like we do. It seems long. And then just do this like we've been doing. So this is just the typical splicing we've been doing. Okay. Now I'm going to get ready to start knitting. And I will just knit to the end, and like I've been doing, I will be spinning that so I can keep those ends kind of locked in place. Obviously I do a better job when it's for real. Just spin, twist that yarn, and as you can see, I'm getting closer and closer to the end, and that is nice to have that. I'm going to take the pin, get that out of the way. Okay. So when I turn it, you can see I have this little loop. I think you can see it, this little loop. You can see the waste yarn is going through that loop. That is the turning loop of the color that I just ended. And if it's long enough, I can put that right up on the needle and knit it together with that first stitch, and that will lock it into place. If it's a little shorty like this one, what I do is I bring this crochet hook through, and if we can get rid of this now, and I just pull that working yarn through. That's our stitch. Put it up on the needle. Then I pass this stitch over, and that is the equivalent of knitting the first stitch together with that little turning loop. And then I would just keep knitting the row. So that end is locked into place. And I have no end to weave in. Let's say I needed to do a full Russian join, which is actually stopping this green color and starting another color. So the green is going to stop, it's not going to continue, and my next color is going to start. So what I do here is I have to mark the end of my green, and I am going to mark that right at the base of my stitch with this little pin. And then I'm going to pick back my stitches. Okay, and I'm going to turn. And that pin marks the exact end of where I want the green. So what I'm going to do is break that yarn and get it ready to splice like I've been doing. Okay, I'm going to break those ends at different spots, and then I'm going to fold that back on itself and splice it. But before I do, I'm going to bring in my second color. Whoops. Okay, making this a little awkward. It shouldn't be this awkward. Anyway, so I'm going to fold that right at the pin, and then I am going to wet this again, as we do. And just wrap it. Okay, and I'm ready to knit back. Again, I twist it to make sure it looks like the yarn, and it also locks everything together. And I start knitting. And in theory, if everything works, and as you know, things don't always work exactly the way they're supposed to, but in theory, when I get back here, it's going to be very close to the end. I'm going to take out this pin, and now I have my new, it did work beautifully. It ended exactly where it was supposed to, and then if I was continuing, I would then splice this end together, and I would just keep knitting, and so the green would stop and the blue would continue, and then we would have our Russian join.